Trucks and bulk bins filled with rust. Boy leaves home to make a crust. A father's dreams reduced to dust, but he must go on. Tortured red gums unashamed, sunburnt country wisely named, chisel ploughed and wire claimed, but never, never, never tamed. Whirlwind swirls a paper high, same old news of further dry, of broken clouds just passing by. That's my home. Chapter 9. Boy leaves home to make a crust. Everything was fine for our farming partnership until 1970. That was the year I left to follow my old man Emu success. Locally, I had become known as the one who could play guitar and sing around the fire with my bush and rugby mates, so I decided to try my hand at entertaining people at the Imperial Hotel in Moree, just for fun, or to be more specific, at the 1810 restaurant out the back. I'd already proved I could entertain at a coffee lounge in Moree, and Max and Ernie Hitchens, who owned the hotel, paid me $10, which just about covered a meal and drinks for two. I was singing mainly folk songs, plus some Johnny Cash and Roger Miller, Harry Belafonte, and anything that people enjoyed. The Kingston Trio had shown me how to entertain people with good music. Plus, I'd been singing George Formby songs on the ukulele at the age of 9. It was fun and gained me some friends. It didn't occur to me at the time that I could write my own songs. In the 60s, I was blown away when I heard Rolf Harris's Tie Me Kangaroo Down. Wow, listen to that accent. I thought no hint of American style, and he had a wobble board. What a gimmick. Everything was so original. And then came A Great Big Dog with that breathing effect called Eefin and Arfin. On top of that, Rolf was a painter. He painted pictures as part of his show. Next came Jake the Peg. I liked Rolf's real Aussie stuff and his ability to entertain. Going round and round on a tractor gives you a lot of time to think. The bush around Tralee had been ring-barked a couple of generations before, leaving glorious open bush with knee-high Mitchell grass, clover and crowsfoot grass. It was prime wool country, but times were changing. Properties were being transformed from sheep country to growing crops, which meant the land was ideal for kangaroos and emus. You'd watch the huge thunderclouds gather overhead, sometimes drawn together to create an isolated downpour, and you'd think, it might come over our place with a bit of luck. Old Man Emu was written while I was on the tractor. Emus and kangaroos at Tralee surrounded me, so they became the main characters in the song. I never saw an emu racing a kangaroo, and I still don't know which of them is the faster. My answer is always, kangaroos don't run, they hop. My life as a songwriter really took off in the 1810 restaurant when I first sang Old Man Emu. The song was my attempt to write another Tie Me Kangaroo Down. You can hear the Rolf Harris and Roger Miller influences in the zany lyrics. The small restaurant crowd, mainly rugby mates and their girlfriends, went off. It's the only time I've had to sing the same song 3 times in one show in my entire musical career. That was enough to make me realise I was onto something. And believe it or not, that was my intention in the first place, to write a hit. Novel songs were the only kind of Aussie songs that radio stations would play back then. We weren't ready for serious songs with an Aussie accent, unless you liked the Hillbilly Hour on Radio 3DB. We had been so used to hearing American hits that our own accent sounded embarrassing. All the quintessential Aussie songs of the 1960s and 1970s were humorous songs. Pub with No Beer, Red Back in the Toilet Seat, I Hope Your Chooks Turn Into Emus, and of course Rolf Harris's songs. That was the way to go. Chad Morgan was huge in those years because he virtually sent himself up as an Aussie in every song. Remember the first countdown shows on TV? Good-looking young Aussies used to mime American hits. We've come a long way, and I'm so pleased now that I have been a part of changing that attitude. I was in a fortunate position back then. I had a useful family connection in Melbourne. Dad's first cousin, Brian Rangett, was Channel 9's musical director. He was highly respected for his involvement in Graham Kennedy's In Melbourne Tonight and all musical events in the early days of Channel 9. Brian had already helped me to purchase at wholesale price my first maiden guitar, made in Melbourne. It was a nylon string guitar. American folk singer Joan Baez played such a guitar, and I wanted to play like her. I played my very rough version of Old Man Emu to Brian on my 4-track reel-to-reel tape recorder. I had my guitar on one side of the tape and my voice on the other. This was not ideal. It needed to be mixed together on another machine, so poor Brian had to flick the switch from one side to the other to get some idea of the song. Fortunately, he was impressed enough to suggest I offer the song to the champion boxer Lionel Rose. Lionel had a #1 hit, I Thank You. My reaction was quite strong. I thought, no way, I want to record Old Man Emu myself. So Brian rang the producer of Kevin Dennis's New Faces to come down immediately and meet me. I was amazed at what power Brian had. I went on New Faces that week. It normally took an audition and months of waiting to get on that show. I won the Victorian New Faces hands down. I was so pleased I didn't let Brian down for his faith in me. I still remember the cameramen bouncing up and down behind their cameras. Once again, it was an instant hit with everyone, and they gave me the Fred Award, a bright red bearded cartoon-like head on a Bakelite base, voted on by the crew. Ron Shooter, a little bearded man I soon came to call Rumpelstiltskin, was a sponsor of the show, and he always hung around New Faces looking for new talent for Fable Records. He offered me a recording deal straight away. Naively, I signed a publishing contract with Tudor and gave away my ownership of the recording. This means the original recording is still being sold from one recording label to another. I get artist royalties for the song, but not mechanical royalties. It's the only recording I don't have complete control over to this day. Bugger. Not to worry, I've re-recorded it and not too many people would know the difference. So Old Man Emu was released on Ron Tudor's independent Fable label. I didn't win the national New Faces. I can't even remember who did. It always amuses me when I recall that John Collins, a judge on the national New Faces, predicted that Old Man Emu wasn't good enough for television, so he marked me down. The Melbourne judge didn't agree with Collins. He was right. During 1970, I sang and sometimes mimed Old Man Emu on every TV show available, and there were plenty back then. Even regional television channels had musical shows. The song was a huge hit, yet Fable didn't bother to send me the single. In fact, radio station 2VM in Moree received it before I heard the finished product. They rang and told me they were going to play it. I was out feeding my pigs early in the morning, my transistor sitting on a fence post in anticipation, when I first heard the song on radio. It was quite surreal. I sounded older than I imagined. I was only 23. What a thrill, my voice on radio! I doubt that anything has blown me away as much as that in my 44-year career. For a while, I kept the radio on all the time, hoping to hear my song again. At night, I would tune into 3UZ in Melbourne and could hear it creeping up the charts. It reached #1 and was there for 5 weeks. It was played in New Zealand and even got a spin in California. The rest is history, as they say. I knew then I could write a song. What I didn't know was that it would take so long to write another good one. I took off from Tralee with my parents' blessing. The wheat farm would survive without me. It was time to see what was on offer with a #1 hit. I was onto my 3rd E.H. Holden by that time. The ute waiting for me when I first left school had been destroyed in a prang with a header, or wheat harvester. I then took over a farmhand's station wagon, but ended up with a sedan by the time I left the farm. Travelling to rugby training in Moree and to games across the northwest took its toll on that car. Night driving back then was hazardous and there were roos everywhere. No car survived it, especially at night. I reckon there was a roo dent in every panel by the time I set off on my brilliant career. My first stop was Tamworth. Mr. Hoedown, John Minson, was king of country music radio on 2TM at the time. I thought it was a good idea to call in and see him. Well, he was so pleased to see me that we spent the day together around the area. John's young son, Laurie, tagged along with us. It's a bit of a blur, but a few things I remember vividly. He took me out to the legendary bushranger Thunderbolt's cave. Perhaps he thought I would write about him. We also visited a house where 3 budding guitarists showed me their skills, the late Gary Brown and the Emmanuel brothers, Tommy and Phil. I still made it to Sydney that day. That's when I first met radio personalities John Laws and Bob Rogers. I was encouraged to go to Sydney for a Fable record launch. The Fable label was born out of an argument between radio stations and major record companies to do with royalties. Ron Tudor took the opportunity to sign artists to sing American covers and offer the songs to radio without worrying about royalties. Fable artists Matt Flinders, Liv Mason and Bill and Boyd were going to be there. I was wide-eyed and green and everyone wanted to meet me, including the popular radio personality John Laws. I didn't know who he was. His radio program wasn't broadcast in Moree back then, and because I was originally from Victoria, his fame hadn't reached me. We hit it off straight away, and I remember Bill and Boyd telling me how fortunate I was that Lawsy had taken a shine to me. I now know Lawsy has a soft spot for bushies. I reckon it's because of their lack of bullshit. Lawsy had been a jackaroo around Mudgee and started his radio career in Bendigo. That helped, I guess. I certainly had no airs or graces, with a badly dented EH parked outside. After my visit to Sydney, I continued on down the Hume Highway to Melbourne, cock-a-hoop on top of the world and wearing a silly small-brimmed hat. A cop with dandruff all over his shoulders pulled me up on the old wooden bridge at Gundagai and booked me for having a damaged number plate. The yellow paint had worn off from driving through the wheat stubble. I'm sure the cop just didn't like how I looked. The dented EH probably didn't impress him either. I felt like telling him to use a medicated shampoo. I went on to record a whole album simply titled John Williamson. They were all my own songs, and except for Old Man Emu, they were very ordinary. Crap, in fact.